Well, I figured that today we would do a video on 9mm AR triggers to see which one might be the best bang for the buck. So I've had a lot of fun with the AR9 platform. You know, we've done videos where we've done builds where we built this one from scratch using Arms. If you're interested in that, I'll link to that build series in the description. You know, and then later on, we got the CMMG Banshee, which we didn't have to build, but we did do a lot of modifications to it. You know, and then we've tried different uppers from Firearms. Also played with the Indo Mag, which was a 9mm conversion magazine. So you could use your standard 5.56 lower and then just slap on an upper to it, and it retained the last round bolt hold open, which was absolutely awesome. But today I really wanted to focus on the triggers because there's been a lot of misconceptions about 9mm AR triggers and using standard AR triggers. And not only that, what options are actually available to those of you who actually want to buy or build a 9mm AR platform that uses Glock mags? What triggers are available and what are the pros and cons to each of them? So ignorantly, I made a mistake when I built this first Arms pistol. I actually chose a Hyperfire 24C trigger for this. And now this trigger wasn't made for the AR9s. And at the time, there weren't any AR9 triggers out there available at all. Typically, we had to rely on forums or somebody that had actually tried an AR-15 trigger in one of these 9mm lowers to see if they actually would function or not. And thankfully, I got really lucky, and this thing has performed without a hitch for the past 2.5 years. I can't even tell you how many rounds that I put through this pistol or through any of them really. And this trigger has been absolutely amazing and has ran like a top. A couple of pros to the Hyperfire trigger is you got this adjustable height trigger shoe. In addition to that, it also has like a suspension system inside the trigger. And the reason that is it increases how hard the hammer falls. Typically, when you lighten the trigger on an AR platform, you also run the chance of running into light primer strikes. Well, with this one, it completely eliminates that. Although it's not designed for the AR9 platform, it 100% works in my experience, and I love it to death. The other great thing about this trigger is it can be adjusted between 2.5 pounds and 3.5 pounds. It has zero take up, short break, short reset, and that is it. There is no play in this trigger, and it is super easy to shoot it fast. The cons to this is the price. This trigger runs approximately $250. If it's something that you want to buy, just follow the first link in the video description. But overall, you do get what you pay for with these triggers, and this one has been just a blast to shoot. Now, the next trigger that I tried, I don't really have it right here with me. I only have 2 lowers for the AR9, and I had to take it out of one of the lowers to try the newest trigger that we're going to talk about here in a minute. But that's the Elfman Tactical 9mm PCC triggers. Similar to the Hyperfire trigger, the Elfman Tactical triggers are very much adjustable as well. They actually have a little bit of a larger range in regards to adjustability. The Elfman Tactical triggers are skeletonized, and they can be adjustable from 2.75 pounds in trigger pull all the way up to 4 pounds if you so choose. They're also single stage, they have zero take up and a very short reset. The only flaw that I could really find in it was because the trigger shoe was skeletonized, if you pulled it really hard, once you broke all the way through the trigger and you hit that final wall, I did find there was a little bit of play in it, but it didn't affect the fireability or the usability of the gun at all. It was just a nitpicky thing that I definitely noticed. The Elfman Tactical trigger is the most expensive trigger of all of these triggers that we're going to talk about today. It costs $9 more than the Hyperfire 24C trigger. But the cool thing is you can choose whether you want a curved shoe or if you want a flat shoe. I chose the flat shoe. That's what I like for all of my triggers, but everybody's different. The next trigger that I tried that was actually made for the 9mm AR platform is the Velocity trigger. Now, if you've watched any of my videos in the past on standard AR builds and AR-15 upgrades, this is my 4th Velocity trigger. A couple things that I like about Velocity. Number one, they're made right here in the United States. Actually, they're made in Phoenix, Arizona. And I've been to their facility before, and they're some of the coolest and nicest people I've ever met. They even have their dogs there. It's just a great place. But last year at this time, I actually went to their facility and did a video, and they installed this trigger right here called the MCP trigger. And what was different about this trigger is the shoe is set a little bit forward, and then you can adjust the cant of it. So you can see I have the shoe kind of tilted out a little bit, And what it does is it can increase your length of pull, and that's especially beneficial for pistol style setups, because sometimes we're like this with these pistols, and sometimes it's kind of nice to have a little bit of a longer length of pull because of the way that your wrist gets tweaked and things like that when you're shooting a pistol. And so they came out with one for the 9mm platform. The coolest part about these triggers is that you can totally swap out these trigger shoes. I think the trigger shoes are about 15 bucks. You can choose a plethora of different colors and different types of shoes. As an example, this, you can see on the front here, has a serrated face. It's also flat, but it also has an indexing point. I like that a lot. On the bottom here, I also have their trigger guard, and that allows you to reach up in there with your Allen wrench so you can adjust it if you so choose. Interesting thing about this is I've put quite a few thousand rounds through this particular rifle since I've had this trigger installed. I didn't use any Loctite on the bolt that holds this trigger, and it has not come loose at all since. I was a little bit worried about that, but I guess this could be kind of like your long-term follow-up review of it. Still running strong, still runs great. I've never had that come loose. I remember a few people commented asking about that. Now, the cool thing about these triggers is the Allen wrench, you don't need to have a cutout down here. You can just fit the Allen wrench right up in here so you can adjust the cant of it. On this one, I have it completely straight, but you can see the face of this one is quite a bit different from the other one. It's not serrated, and it also has a curved radius to it. But the coolest part is they also have other types of shoes if you don't want to get that kind of shoe right here. Here's one in flat dark earth. It is radiused on the front and there is no indexing point. Right here we have a black one that's very much the same as the flat dark earth. Right here we have one that is very similar to those, except this one is curved and radiused. And then right here we have a blue one that's straight and radiused with the indexing point, and these are my favorite, this one or the serrated one. Now, there are pros to this trigger, but there's also a couple of cons. Pro number one, it's probably one of the most affordable triggers that we're going to talk about today. This one comes in at an MSRP of $189.99, but they'll be by the link when you go down to the build list and check that out. So you might be able to get them for about $170-ish. Don't hold me to it because I don't know what the codes are yet. The next pro is there's no fuss, no muss with these triggers. They're non-adjustable in regards to the trigger weight. They're only adjustable in regards to the trigger shoe and the angle of the shoe. So it's going to be a little bit easier to install them and get them set into place. Whereas with the Hyperfire trigger, this takes about 3 hands to install, especially with the suspension system. Now, the Elfman Tactical was a little bit easier than the Hyperfire, but because of all the adjustability that has with the trigger weight, it can be a little bit cumbersome as well. This one is no fuss, no muss. It drops straight into your gun, and then you just put your pins through. The only reason I have these anti-rotation things on here was because Elfman Tactical sent them to me when I had their trigger in, and because I had the Elfman Tactical in this gun, when I put this one in, I just threw them back on. But the cool thing is you don't need the anti-walk adapters on there. Inside the trigger shoe are 2 little bitty Allen heads, and what you do is once it's in place and you got your pins in, you tighten those down and it puts upward tension on the pins themselves, therefore they won't walk out. The other con to this trigger is you only get to choose one trigger weight, and that is 4-pound pull, and this one pulls exactly at 4 pounds. Now, truth be told, when you first get it, it's going to feel a little bit stiff, and that's because you need to break it in a little bit. When you first get this trigger, and before the first 100 or 200 rounds are put through it, it's going to pull it around the 4.5 pound mark. However, as you get it broken in, it settles right down to about 3.9 to 4 pounds, which is a really good trigger weight. But interestingly enough, because the way that these trigger shoes are designed and set forward, it doesn't feel like it's that heavy because of the increased leverage based on the way that these triggers are designed. You don't got to run the risk of running a trigger that's too light, but at the same time, it doesn't feel as heavy as most triggers because of the way that it's designed. That's definitely a plus about it. There's 0 take up. It is at the wall. Here's the reset. Break. One thing to note about this is because of the way that the trigger is angled and offset, it looks like it travels a little bit further than it does. However, when I was at the Velocity facility, they did show me one that just had a straight shoe on it, just for example purposes, and the distance that it travels is actually not as far as it appears. It's just an optical illusion. Now, on the next trigger that we're going to talk about, I actually don't have one with me because I don't even own one yet, so I can't tell you what my experience has been like with it, but I do have one for stand-in purposes. So this is the CMC drop-in AR-15 trigger that has the flat straight bow. This one isn't for 9mm. This one, I actually got it for another build that we're gonna be doing very soon. But they make a 9mm pistol caliber carbine trigger that is exactly like this one. And this one is also on the very affordable side. They're around the 180 to 190 mark. But in my experience, the CMC AR-15 triggers have been really good and really reliable. This is from the panty dropper build we did about a year ago. And the only thing I could find was a curved version of the CMC trigger. But here's the take up and break. So very little take up, break, reset, and it's right at the wall already. They all pull at a consistent 3.5 pounds. It's just now they have one for the 9mm pistol caliber carbine. So which one do I think is the best bang for the buck, or which one do I think is the best of all 4 of these different triggers that we're talking about today? And I think that it really depends on what your purposes are for your gun. I think if you're very picky about your trigger pull and very particular about how it feels on the reset, how it feels on the break, how the trigger weight feels, then you most definitely need to either go with the Hyperfire 24C trigger or the Elfman tactical trigger. Granted, those triggers are $70 to $80 more depending on where you get it. But in my experience with anything firearms related, you typically get what you pay for, except with the FN 509 where the firing pin breaks. So that's the one exception to that rule that I've had in about 3.5 years. Like I mentioned earlier, you do get this suspension system looking thing that's in there. That actually gives you a heavier hammer drop. So you don't got to worry about any types of light primer strikes or anything like that. However, I've never had a light primer strike ever in my life. I think the key to not getting light primer strikes is to just use good ammo and not buy reloaded ammo from Jim Bob down the road. That's usually your best bet. Nothing against people that reload. It's just sometimes the guys that reload and then try to sell stuff, they usually just aren't good at their job. That's not always the case. So don't take that as a blanket statement. It's just been my experience. So those are definitely the best 2. I think if you are super particular trigger snob, I'm very much a super particular trigger snob as well. However, with that said, I think that these would even satisfy the biggest critic out there. The reason I say that is they both run great, and I don't ever feel a need to really adjust them. You know, this one does have the adjustable trigger shoe, which I think is a pro, and it's the same price as the CMC trigger. So in my opinion, because these are the same price, I think you get a little bit more for your money with the Velocity trigger than the CMC. But the downside is you get a 4-pound pull with this one, and you get a 3.5-pound pull with this one. They're both single stage, and there's no other options for the trigger weight. Now you're probably wondering, well, what if you could only have one? Well, I got to make it a little more complicated. If I could only have one, I'm going to say if I could only have one in each category. If I could only have one adjustable trigger, I would go with the Hyperfire. Even though it's not classified as a 9mm pistol carbine trigger, it works fantastically well. And for the price, I think you get a little bit more than what you get with Elfman. And for the non-adjustable versions, I would get this one from Velocity Triggers just because you do get a little bit of adjustability. And I like the fact that it locks the pins down without having to use anti-rotation pins, and the fact that I can change out the trigger shoes if I want to. So let me know if you guys have any questions about these down in the comments section below. Let me know if there's something I didn't cover. Follow the first link in the description if you want to find the build list and the promo codes. But until next time, guys, I love you, and you guys stay sexy.